Streaming, start recording. Good morning, Chavra on Zoom. Good morning. Good morning. We begin today's daf, Shevuos. Daf Hey. We begin by thanking all of our sponsors. We thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsors, the Tilson family of Eretz Yisrael, as a zechus for Besuras Teres for Am Yisrael. We also thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Iyar. We thank Dr. Shmuel and Rabbi Karabkin for sponsoring all the shurim and all the drashas in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Shmuel's father, Leonard Karabkin, Lipa ben Yecheskel Hakayin. His yahrzeit is on Pesach Sheni, and Neshama should have an Aliyah, and the family should have an Achama. We also thank you so much, Steve. We also thank Aryeh and Haley Lichter for sponsoring the week of learning Lil Nishmas, Haley's mother, Linda Kutin, Rachel Leah Bas Ruven Meir, Neshama should have an Aliyah Legan Eden, and the family should have a Nechama. So today's daf is daf Hey. We're going to pick up on daf Dalid Amud Beis. We're going to pick up from Amar Le Ravina La Meimer. So just a very quick recap, as you just heard a couple minutes ago from Zevi, that what the Gemara is trying to do over here is trying to figure out who the Tana of the Mishnah is, and we went back and forth. Is it Rabbi himself? Is Rabbi quoting several different people? And ultimately, we wanted to figure out if Rabbi possibly could have been the one to be darshaning Riboy Miot as opposed to Klal Pratu Klal. Now, I'm sure you've been through this yesterday, but just very quickly, Riboy Miot and Riboy Miot and Riboy and Klal Pratu Klal are very similar concepts. The question just is, which one are you using? Riboy Miot and Riboy is more inclusive. Klal Pratu Klal is more limiting. So anytime we're going to have a machlokas, whether we're going with the logic of Riboy Miot and Riboy, or Klal Prat Uklal, we're going to be deciding which one is, that didn't come out right. If you're going with Klal Pratu Klal, it will be much more limiting. If you're going with Riboy Miot and Riboy, then it's going to be much more inclusive. So let's go see, is it possible to actually say, as we just got finished saying, that Rabbi goes with the logic of Riboy Miot and Riboy, as he just did in the previous Gemara with regard to Pidyon Haben. So I'm going to reveal La Meimar. Rabbi Darsh Riboy Umiot. Is it true that Rabbi actually darshans Riboy and Miot? The problem is Rabbi Klali Uprati Darsh. We find that Rabbi indeed darshans with the logic of Klal Uprat and not with the logic of Riboy Miot. Titania, for says in the Brisa, Martseya. What's this talking about? It's talking about an Eved Ivri. An Eved Ivri is a Eved, he sells himself, he stays for 6 years. If you'd like to stay beyond the 6-year mark, there's a whole procedure. Part of the procedure is he gets his ear pierced with an awl. Now this awl is referred to in the Torah as a Martseya. The Gemara says, Eili El Martseya. I only know from here that you can use the actual Martseya, an awl, to pierce his ear. Minayin L'Rabos. How do we know that I can actually use another type of tool, such as a sul, hasira, hamachat, mekadeach, v'mechtav? So the first three, sul, sira, and machat, are all wooden types of elements, whether it's a splint or a sharp piece of wood, a different type of wooden tools that would be used to pierce his ear. Kadeach, in modern Hebrew, kadeach is a drill. They don't have it's not referring to like a DeWalt drill that you bought in Home Depot. We're talking about a hand type of drill that you'd be able to pierce his ear with. V'hamichtav, again, another type of metal instrument to be used to pierce his ear. So how do you know you can use all those tools to pierce the ear of the Eved? Every time Lomar, v'lakachta. It says v'lakachta samartzeh. You shall take this all. So we darsha from there. Kol davar shenilkach b'yad. Any item which is taken in your hand. Divrei Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. So you have v'lakachta tells you can take anything. Amartzeh is limiting. Now Rabbi says martzeh. Ma martzea miyuchad, just like the martzea, this all is something which is special. Why is it special? Because it's shamateches. Af kol shamateches. It has to be that whatever you're going to be taking is going to be made out of metal. So now, if Rebbe was the one who went with the logic of Riboy Umiyat, he would be the one who's much more inclusive, not the one who's much less inclusive. I just went ahead and told you that you could use all these types of tools, even the ones that are made out of wood. Who is the one who says that? That's not the opinion of Rabbi, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Why does he say that? Because Rabbi Yehuda, he darshans riboy miyat, and therefore it says v'lakachta. You could take anything which you can hold in your hand, and then it says the martseya. So again, martseya does limit it. What does he actually limit? So the Gemara doesn't actually explicitly say this over here. But Rashi brings it on the top of the next amud, and it's quoted in the Gemara in Kedushin that the limitation of martseya tells you it has to be a tool, as opposed to using some type of sam, a medicine. I assume some kind of acid. Seems like a pretty painful procedure to burn a hole in someone's ear, but one might think that any way you make a hole in someone's ear would be okay. So the pasuk says, no. It has to be something which is a lakachta and somewhat similar to a martseya, that it's an actual tool. But if it's not a tool, rather it's just sam, a medication, it's going to be excluded. Now, the one who's more inclusive in this case is Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because he's using the logic of riboy and miyat. Who's the one who's much more limiting? That is Rabbi. Why? Clearly because Rabbi follows the logic of klal uprat. So therefore, lakachta says anything. Martseya is limiting. Therefore, it has to be something which you hold. It has to be something which is made out of metal. Af kol shematachas v'amrinan. But Michael Mithigi, what is the subject of their machlokas? Rabbi darish klal uprati. Rabbi uses klal prat, and therefore it's much more limiting. And Rabbi Yehuda darish riboy umiyat. Rabbi Yehuda dashes riboy umiyat. So therefore we have a major problem, because even though you just told me that Rabbi, when it comes to the halacha pidyon ben, is going to be dashing riboy umiyat, however, we see very clearly that the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi is whether we darshan with the logic of riboy umiyat or klal prat. And who's the one who says klal prat? Rabbi. So now, top of Hamad Aleph, the Gemara says, you're right. It's true. The Alma, generally, in just a typical case in Shas, when Rebbe is going to darshan a pasuk, he's always going to use the concept of Alma Klali Prati Darsh. He's always going to use the logic of Klal Prat, which is a more generalization and then a specification, as opposed to a riboy, which is inclusive, and then a miyat, and then exclusion. He's always going to use Klal Prat. What's the reason why when it comes to pidyon haben, he darshans riboy miyat? Because he follows the Tana of the Rabbi Shmuel, which is the Tana of the Rabbi Shmuel, B'mayim shnei pa'amim. It says B'mayim 2 times in a row. This is not related to our sugya, but the Tana of the Rabbi Shmuel is talking about a case where we actually read this recently. This was in the Parsha Shemini, when it talks about the halachas of kosher fish. So it says, Es zeh tochlu mikol asher b'mayim. This shall be eaten from anything that swims in the water. Kol asher yesh lo snapir v'kaskeses b'mayim. Anything that has fins and scales in the water. So now, b'mayim and b'mayim are the klalim, the generalizations. Now afterwards after it says b'mayim twice, then it says b'yamim u'banachalim osam tochelu. So mayim is a generalization. Yamim and achalim, a sea or a stream, is considered to be a specification. The problem over here is that instead of it being a klal, a generalization, and then a prat, which is a specification, and then a klal, which would be the mayim, it says mayim, so it has both klalim together, and then afterwards it has the prat. So it's klal uprat. So in such a case, Tana Rabbi Shmuel says when you have b'mayim shnei pamim, ein zeh klal uprat ela riba umiyut. This is, in other words, this is an exception to the rule. Even if you're a person who generally uses klal uprat, generally anytime you have these generalizations and then specifications, you're always going to use klal uprat. And as we mentioned, it's always going to be much more limiting. That's only true if it's actually structured as klal, prat, uklal. But if it's klal uprat, then you're going to default to the riboy miyut and riboy logic. So therefore, when it comes to pidyon haben, so in that pasuk as well, if you go back, in that pasuk, what was it talking about? It says over there, it says, Peduyav miben chodesh Ribo, Be'erkecha Kesef, then it says Tifta. So it says Peduyev and Tifta together next to each other. So therefore, he's also going to say in that case, since Peduyev and Tifta are right next to each other, and then when it has the specification it's afterwards, you're going to go ahead and follow the logic of Ribo and Miyat. In other words, over there it says, Upeduyev and Chodesh Tifta, and then it says, at the end, so therefore he's going to use the logic of Riboy Miyut as opposed to Klal Prat. In other words, but the bottom line is, the Gemara is now going to say, Rabbanan, now those who argue and actually do Darshan Klal Prat, what they say is, Amravina Kedami B'Marava, Kamakrish Atmos Shteklal Sesmucha Zelzeh, Hatel Prat B'Neim V'Donim Klal Prat. In other words, Rabbanan argue and say, don't get too bent out of shape by the fact that you have two Klalim next to each other. So it says B'Mayim, and then it says Yam and Chalam. All right, just move over the second Mayim, and then sandwich them together. In other words, the fact that you have both Klalim, Klal, and then Prat, it doesn't make a difference because the order is not as important. However, the problem is that it seems like Rabbi, who did use Riboy Miyut, he must have been following time of the Rabbi Shmuel. If he's following time of the Rabbi Shmuel, that's why he defaulted in that case to Riboy Miyut. But now the problem is, Hashadam et Rabbi Klal Prati Darish. The bottom line is, what you're telling me is, Rabbi Darshan's Klal Prat, not Riboy Miyut, barring the exception that he will darshan Riboy Miyut only when you have Klal, and Prat. But if you have Klal, Prat, and Klal, he's always going to fall back in Klal, Prat, to Klal. So now the problem is, Bal Karcha Kasha Shevuos. The whole idea was you wanted to use Rabbi and Rabbi himself to be the author of the Mishnah and say he darshans Riboy and Miyut and not Klal, Prat. And that's why how he can include all the Shevuos, all the oaths of L'Sha'avar of the past. The problem just is we just got finished saying that he doesn't use Riboy Miyut. He uses Klal Prat. So now he cannot be the Tan of our Mishnah. The Gemara says, you're right. Ela b'Shevuos nasav lived Rekiva. Leilos, really, you have to go back to this original teretz, which is that yes, Rabbi wrote the Mishnah, but in this case, Rabbi did not write his own opinion in the Mishnah. Rather, he wrote the opinion of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, and it can't be his opinion. So, in short summary, what we've accomplished today is that it's true that there are some exceptions where Rebbe himself will darshan a Riboy and Miyut, but that's the exception. The default for Rebbe is that whenever he has a generalization, a specification, and a generalization, he's going to use the logic of Klal Pratu Klal, which is much more limiting, and it says you could only include something which is very similar to the specification. He does not follow Riboy Miyut and Miyut, which essentially is much more inclusive and only excludes one thing unless there's a problem with the Klal Prat to Klal. For example, the Klal is too close to the other Klal and then the Prat is far off. Therefore, it cannot be the Rebbe's the Tan of the Mishnah. Rather, the Tan of the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. Although Rebbe wrote it, he was just quoting Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Getting back to another Gemara that was mentioned yesterday. We're done with the Klal Prat to Klals for now. So for those who checked out for Klal Prat to Klal, Riboy Miyut and Riboy, on to the next piece. Gufa. We learned in yesterday's Amud. Minayin. So the Gemara is now going to quote a long piece of Gemara from yesterday, and they're going to analyze it. Minayin she'eno chayev ela al sheyesh b'yadia betchila v'yadia basof. We're talking about a person who walks into the Beis HaMikdash when he is tamei, or he comes into contact with something which is sanctified, which can't be touched when he is tamei, or something which is consecrated. So the bottom line is, how do you know? This was yesterday's Gemara. She'enu chayev ela al sheyesh b'yadia betchila. That you know he knew beforehand that he wasn't supposed to touch it, and he knew at the end that he did touch it, or he knew he wasn't supposed to go into the Beis HaMikdash, and then at the end he went in. So he has to know beforehand and know afterwards, and then v'helam beintayim, and he forgot in the middle. In other words, just a drop of background. Whenever we have any type of chiyuv, any type of responsibility for a person who's liable for a mistake, so what he's liable for is the concealment in the middle, the mistake that he made in the middle. So we're always going to count the fact that when in Parak Klal Gadol Masechas Shabbos, there's a whole sugya called Shigagos. And Rambam has a parak called Shigagos. And what we're doing over there is you always want to find out how many mistakes were made. Generally, a shogeg is considered to be a helam. That means a person knew something, and then there was a ha'alama. There was a temporary lapse in his mind of not knowing what happened. Now, the halama could either be that the person forgot the halacha, or that the person forgot the specific circumstance. So a person could have forgotten that it's asur for a person who's tamei to walk into the Beis HaMikdash, or a person could have forgotten that he is tamei. That's considered to be a halama. Now, a halama, by definition, always means that there was something that he once knew and he forgot it. And that's the basic premise of today's Gemara, which is you have to have a yediyah in the beginning, you have to have known at some point, forgotten that, and then found out afterwards. So that's what the Gemara said yesterday. Minayin she'eno chayiv, person's not chayiv, ella al sheyesh ba yediyah batchila, he originally knew, the yediyah basof, and now at the end he knows he made a mistake. However, v'helam b'tayim, the mistake happened during the concealed period in the middle. Tamalomar, we know that from v'nelam shnei pa'amim. It says v'nelam twice. So if you read the pasuk, some of us have it on the start of the Gemara. It says, "O nefesh asher tiga b'chol davar tamei," person who touches something which is tamei. O benivlas chaya tameim, where he touches the corpse of a dead animal. O benivlas behemoth tameya, he touches the corpse of a dead, again, impure animal. O benivlas sheretz tamei. V'nelam imenu, he forgot about it. So now v'nelam imenu, he forgot that he touched it. V'hu tamei v'ashem. Now he becomes tamei because he touched this impure animal. Next pasuk. Oh, ki yiga betumas adam, he touches an impure person. L'chol tumasa shayit maba v'nelam imenu. So again, he touches a person, becomes tamei, and v'nelam imenu, he forgets about it. So you have two times in consecutive psukim where it says v'nelam imenu, he forgot about it. So therefore, the Gemara says v'nelam shnei pamim. Divrei Rabbi Kiva, that's what Rabbi Kiva says. Since it says v'nelam shnei pamim, we learn from there you had to have known about it and then forgotten about it, and then known about it again. Mechlal. Now the Gemara says, Rabbi disagrees, and he says, you don't need the two words of a nelam to teach you that he knew, forgot, and knew. Why? Because Harehu Omer, it says v'nelam, it says he forgot. Now Mechlal, sheyada. By definition, forgetting something means that you knew about it. You can't forget something that you never knew. You could not know it, but that's not called forgetting about it. V'nelam is, it was concealed from him. In other words, there's a piece of knowledge he had, and right now, in this moment, that piece of knowledge is somewhere, in a place where it's inaccessible to him. But just not knowing something is not called v'nelam. So now, v'hu yada, and now he knows about it. Now, harei kan shtei yediyos. If you forgot about something, that's you knew first, then you forgot. And now v'hu yada, and now he knows about it, so you have the whole picture. You have the full sandwich. In other words, you have to sandwich your forgetting about it between two knowledges. So now if the definition of an elam is that you forgot about it, so you already have the first one, you knew about it, you forgot about it, and v'hu yada gives you the second piece of knowledge at the end for the second half of the sandwich. So now, in Kain Matam alone of an elam, so if that's the case, why does it say an elam a second time? L'chayiv al ha'elam tuma al ha'elam mikdash. According to Rabbi, we want to include two different types of forgetting. First of all, he forgot that he's tamei, or another case is he knew that he was tamei, but he forgot that it's asur to walk into the Beis HaMikdash. That's the Gemara from yesterday. Amar Mar. So now Gemara goes ahead to analyze this. V'nelam. It says v'nelam. Machlal sheyada. This implies that he knew about that. Now my mashma, the Gemara says, how do you know that? Where is the implication that you knew about it just because it says v'nelam? Amarava midolok siv v'hi aluma mimenu. Since it doesn't say v'hi aluma mimenu was concealed from him, in other words, if he never knew about it, it would be considered concealed from him. However, it says v'ne'elam. Ne'elam means you had it and you lost. In other words, the implication of the word v'ne'elam is you knew about it, but then you forgot about it. Amar le'abaya. So Abaye said back to Rava, Elamiyat, if that's the case, that every time you have the word v'ne'elam, it means he originally knew about it and then forgot about it. We're going to find ourselves having a bunch of problems. Why? Gabe sota, when it comes to a sota, t'chsiv v'ne'elam me'ene isha. It was concealed from her husband. So very quickly, we learned sota together not too long ago. It is actually 2 years ago. Right? So we'll do a quick review. What is sota? Sota is a woman who allegedly engaged in inappropriate behavior with another person. She's a married woman, and her husband accuses her of engaging in inappropriate behavior with another man. So he warns her not to seclude herself with that man. That's called kinoi. She goes ahead and she secludes herself again with that man. And there's a whole discussion in the first parak, whether they're Eidim, the Eid Ein Ba. The whole discussion of the bottom line is, if she conceals herself with this person, there's a process where she's brought down to the Beis HaMikdash, and they ask her kinds of questions. She makes Shevuos, and ultimately, if at the end of the story she continues to deny it, the husband continues to insist on his side of the story, then there's a test which happens with the Mei Sota. They write to the Parsha Sota, they erase it, they put it into water, and she drinks it. Now, if she is innocent, she gets the most wonderful brachos. If she is guilty, the opposite is true, and she dies at the end of the process. So now the Gemara says over here, it says v'nelam ein isha, it's concealed from the eyes of her husband. Mechlal dehavi yada meikara. If you're telling me v'nelam, that she was concealed, means that he knew about it. In other words, he has absolute knowledge that she engaged in this extramarital affair with this man. So now he forgot about it. So now hold on a second, that means he knew about it. According to our logic, v'nelam always means he knew about it. Machlal, sorry, to have a yada meikara. So now, have a yada meikara mibad kulamaya. Is the whole process going to work? The problem is, Vatani, we learned in the Brisa, v'nika ha'ish mi'avon, the man will be cleaned from all sin. V'ha'isha ha'i tisa avona. If she is indeed guilty of engaging this extramarital affair, v'ha'isha ha'i tisa savona, she'll carry the sin. Now the Gemara dashes bizmansha ish benuka mi'avon. If he is clean, then Hamayim Bodkinis Ishto, the water will effectively check out whether she is guilty or innocent. However, Eina Ish Menuk Mi'avan, if the man himself is guilty of sin, then Eina Mayim Bodkinis Ishto. The water is not going to work to check out whether she is guilty or innocent of engaging in this extramarital affair. Now hold on a second. If he knew about the fact that she engaged in this extramarital affair, guess what? She becomes usher to him. If he decided to go ahead and continue living with her, so then his hands are not clean either. And if his hands are not clean, then the whole process is not going to work. Now, we're expecting the process to work because the pasuk says, "V'nela me'eni isha," that she was concealed from her husband. And then the Torah goes on to describe the process of her drinking the water. Now, if vanilla means he knew about it, and now he doesn't know about it, it's not going to work anywhere because he's still engaging in this relationship with her. So therefore, it can't be that vanilla means he knew about it. Vesu. And furthermore, Gabi Torah, the psukim, which describe the Torah in Eov, says the Nelma me'ene kochai, it will be concealed from the eyes of all living things. Me'of hashmayim, not referring to birds, but to the angels. Nistra, it was hidden. Mechlal, that implies the ikad have a yadabe. There were some who knew about the Torah before it was given. The problem is, no one knew the extent of the Torah before it was given. So, in other words, again, it says v'nelam. It was hidden, it was concealed from people before it was given. Now, if you're telling me that means that someone knew about it first, the problem is that the pasuk says that nobody knew about it first. So again, another problem that we have using the word nelam to mean you knew about it and then ultimately forgot about it. Elam Rabbi, Kasava Rabbi is of the opinion that Yedias Beis Rabo Shma Yediah. Rabbi says that when it comes to Tumah, Yedias Beis Rabo is Shema Yediah. In other words, where it's coming from is the concept that everyone knows the halacha at some point. So again, this is a very big assumption that every single Jewish person went to school as a kid. Every Yid went to Cheder, and every Rebbe taught every single kid all the halachas of Tumah and Taira. So now you might not remember exactly that lesson that it was taught in, but every single Jewish person knows at some point in his life that it's also to go into the Beis Hamikdash when you're Tameh. So therefore, that's considered to be a Yediyah. Only Papa says to Abai El Diktani, hold on a second. If you're telling me that every single Jewish person knows about this, and that's why you have to have a Yediyah in the beginning, so everyone knows about it, so hold on a second. So then it's impossible. In other words, you're telling me that everybody knows about it because they learned it in school, so then how do you ever have a scenario where someone doesn't know about it? The case where it says, Is there any Jewish person who did not go to Cheder as a child and learn the halachas of Tumah and Taira? Amarle, you set him in, yes, it could be somebody who did not go to Jewish school. Nowadays, we all go to, hopefully, most of us go to Jewish school. Not all of us have gone to Jewish school. But ultimately, we see the concept that even in times of the Gemara, there was the concept of Tinik Shnishba, and exactly how that applies to a person nowadays is beyond the scope of today's shir. But yes, it's possible that a person did not go to Cheder, did not learn the halachas of Tumah and Taira, and that would be a person who would not have the idea b'tchila. Okay. Tanan Asam. Going back to our Mishnah. Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shehin Arba. One of the things listed in our Mishnah as a 2 that ultimately comes to 4 is Yitzias Shabbos, carrying on Shabbos. But now let's analyze the way this Mishnah is written, not here in Maseches Shevuos, but the way the Mishnah is written in Maseches Shabbos. It says, Yitzias Shabbos, carrying on Shabbos, is Shtayim Shehin Arba B'fnim, 2 which is 4 inside, Shtayim Shehin Arba B'chutz, 2 which is 4 outside. So now, 2, which is 4 inside, 2, which is 4 outside, means 4 plus 4, which is 8. Our Mishnah did not say that. Our Mishnah just simply said, it's Shtayim Shein Arba, which is 4. So therefore the Gemara is going to ask, Ma'ishna Hacha, why is our Mishnah different over here? Tana Shtayim Shein Arba V'sulai, it just simply says Shtayim Shein Arba and nothing more. It has 2 which is 4 inside, 2 which is 4 which is outside. Now just quickly to go through this, the cases are as follows. When we talk about Shtayim Shein Arba B'fnim, Shtayim Shein Arba B'chutz, but B'fnim we're going to refer to as Rishus Hayachid, and B'chutz is Rishus Harabim. Now there's a bunch of different terms which are used in Mishnah Maseches Shabbos which are not literal. But the Gemara just uses it to explain it like this, you'll remember it. The Gemara talks about an ani and a baal bayis. An ani is a poor person, a baal bayis is a homeowner. Generally speaking, if you're going to pass something out the window of a house, so then the baal bayis, the owner of the house, who's settled and comfortable inside his house, is going to be the one who's providing something for the ani, for the poor person who's outside coming to beg for some food. But now, that is not a requirement for Haitzah that a person be wealthy or a person be poor. It makes absolutely no difference. What does make a difference is that with person picked up the item inside of Rishus HaYachid, which is a private domain, and transferred it outside their house into a public domain. Now, in order for a person to violate the biblical prohibition of carrying on Shabbos, what has to be done is there has to be something called an akira, which means you lift it up from the place where it is, you uproot the item from its place, and a hanacha, which is you place the item down in the other domain. So now, typically, if you have one person involved, so let's just say you have a baal bayis, and what happens is he's inside his house. He wants to bring some food outside, so he goes to his kitchen. He picks up some food in the private domain, walks outside to the public domain and puts it down. You have an akira inside, you have a hanacha outside, and he has thereby violated the halachos of carrying on Shabbos. The opposite will be true if you have an ani, a poor person. He has no food. He goes outside and he finds lunch sitting on the floor. So outside in the public domain, he picks up the item. That's the akira. He walks with it into the private domain, into his house. He puts it down on the table. That's the hanacha. He has thereby fulfilled requirements. I should say he has unfortunately violated the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos. Now, when you have two people who are involved, you could have a number of cases, which are, for example, you have the ani standing in the Rishus Harabim outside, and he takes something from outside and puts it inside. So what does he do? He's standing at a window, picks something up on the floor, lifts it up, puts it inside, and puts it inside the house. So that's the case of ani omi b'chutz. You have the ani outside, he places the item inside. Another case is exactly the opposite. You have the person, the baal bayis, the homeowner. He's standing inside, and he takes his hand from inside to outside. He picks an item up off the floor, brings it inside the house, puts it inside his house. He's violated the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos. Now, what happens if you have kind of a hybrid case where you have the ani, let's just say that the guy standing outside, so he picks it up, and the guy inside takes it out of his hand. Or the opposite, you have the guy inside, he picks it up, and the guy outside takes it out of his hand. So you have shared malach over here. Remember, we said you have to lift it up and put it down. What happens if one person picks it up and another person puts it down, or the opposite in the other case? The bottom line is there are 8 possible scenarios of how you could divide this up, where you're going to have 2 of them, I should say, cumulatively you have 4 of them which are a chiyuv, and 4 of them which are a patur. Now, the bottom line is, what our Gemara is saying is, in our Mishnah, we only list 2, which are 4. We don't have all 8 of them. Why are we excluding the other 4 of them? So that's the Gemara's question. The Gemara answers, Hacha, the Gemara says, Hasam, the Iker Shabbasu. Guess what? That Masechta where it mentions all of the cases for, in other words, 2, which is for the Fnim, 2, which is for Bachutz. So you have a total of 8. That is the Iker Shabbos, that's Masechta Shabbos actually. So therefore, the Gemara says, Hasam, the Iker Shabbasu, Tani Avos, Tani Toldos. We wanted to list all the cases, Avos and Toldos. Avos is the main category, and then the Toldos are the subcategories. Now, Hacha, the Lav Iker Shabbasu, this Masechta is called Masechta Shevuos. We're not really learning Halachas Shabbos over here, and therefore we didn't want to get into all the halachas of the subcategories. Hacha, Lav Iker Shabbasu, Avos, Tani, V'Toldos, Lo, Tani. The Gemara says, Avos Ma'niu. What are the Avos? What are the main categories? The Gemara says, Yitzios, taking it outside. And Yitzios, Tarti Havan. Yitzios are only 2. In other words, what if we're only counting Yitzios, we should only have 2, not 4. We're only listing the ones which are, so we have some which are chayv and some which are pater, some which are he's actually liable, and some of them where he's exempt. The Gemara says, our case was lined up right after Maris Nagayim, which is the leprosy. In those cases, just like in all those cases, all the Nagayim are cases where it's a problem. All the cases of carrying a Shabbos should be cases where it's a chiyuv. Over there, since it's Masechta Shabbos, we'll learn all the cases where he's liable and where he's pater. We're teaching the cases where he's chayiv. We're not bothering to mention the cases of patur. So therefore, we're only going to have 4. The Gemara says, Chiyuvei Ma'niu. What are the chiyuv? And where are the cases where it's chayiv? Yitzios, where he's taking it outside as opposed to where he's bringing it in. Yitzios Tartiyav, and Yitzios, in other words, again, we only have 2 cases where he takes it out. Yitzios Tartihu Dehavim. Shtaim Dotza, and Shtaim Da'achnasa. For Yitzios Katani, you have 2. So the Gemara says you have 2 which are going in, 2 which are going out. The Gemara says Yitzios Katani. Over there it says Yitzios, which means to take it out. Amar Ravashi, Tana, our Tana learns Hachnasa. Tana Hachnasa Nami Yitzah Karila. Our Tana refers to bringing it inside as Yitzia as well. In other words, Yitzia literally means bringing it outside, but our Tana actually explains that Hachnasa is also called a Yitzia. Now the Gemara explains, Mimai, from where do you know this? From the Tanaf, it says in the Mishnah, Hamotzi Mershus Lishus, a person carries from one domain to another domain, Chayiv. You chayiv. Now one domain to another domain, Milo Askin to Kamayel Yule, isn't that talking about where he brings it inside or he brings it out? You call it outside. So therefore it's fine to still call it outside even though it's going in. Vidilma Kamak Pik Mershus Yachlus Rabim. How do you know? Maybe that case is where he goes from a Rishus Yachid, which is a private domain to a public domain, and therefore it's called Yitzir because he's taking it out. The Gemara says no. In Cain, that's the case. Nisni Amotzi Mishus Yachlus Rabim. Say that. In other words, the fact that you say you're going from one domain to another domain without specifying going from inside to outside, that means that either way is going to be fine. Now, my Mershus Hashus, I feel Mershus Rabim, Mershus Yachid, Kakarele Hotzah, still we're calling it a Hotzah, so we see that the term Hotzah, taking it out, can still be used even to be bringing it inside, and therefore, the fact that it says Yitzias in the Mishnah cannot be limiting going inside. Now, the time of Mai, what's the reason why we call going inside going outside? The Gemara says, Tana kol akiras chayfetz b'mekomo hotza karila. Anytime you take something out of its place, move it to another place, is considered taking it out. Now, just to explain this very quickly, I'm seeing that we're really short on time. We still have a lot to do today, so we'll get it done. But the concept of why it's considered a hotza is because, just in general, one has to ask, why is carrying something from one place to the next considered to be a malacha on Shabbos? If you go through all the lamatas avos malachas on Shabbos, you're going to find that every one of the malachos, you're going to have to be able to describe something significant that was done. So, for example, when it comes to bishul, cooking, you're always going to have to identify what changed in the item. And that's why there's a big discussion whether or not, or how there could be a chiyuv of bishul, an obligation of cooking when it comes to water. There is, it's prohibited to cook water on Shabbat, but the question is, a lot of Rishonim deal with why. What is the significant change in water just changing its temperature? And there's a lot of discussion about that. When it comes to any one of the malachos, you always want to find out what is it that changed significantly about this item that makes this qualify as one of the 39 prohibited acts. Now, when it comes to hotzah, what did you do? All you did is you picked something up, you moved it from point A to point B. The answer to that is that every item only has its use if it's in the right place at the right time. If the item is in the wrong place at the wrong time, so then it becomes useless. If a person showed up to Daf Yomi and they left their Gemara at home, so then they can't use it. The Gemara is essentially useless for them because it's not here. You show up to work without your computer. So the fact is, you have your computer. You tell your boss, I have it. Don't worry about it. I got my computer. But it's useless. You can't use it. An item is only useful if it's in the right place at the right time. So essentially, every time you pick something up and move it to the proper place, you are then giving that item purpose and use. So therefore, the Gemara is explaining anytime you move something from one place to the next, whether it's going inside or going outside, you are removing it from the place where it's useless and moving it to the place where it's useful, and that's considered a yitzia. You're removing it from the place where it wasn't useful. We spoke about drills earlier today. Person is in construction. He shows up to a construction site without his drill. He says, don't worry, I have my drill. It's in my garage. It's useless. It doesn't help us in your garage. You have to be motzi it from your garage and bring it to the place where you need it. Now it's able to fulfill its tafkid. Therefore, that's considered to be a yitzia. Amar Ravina Masnis Namideka. Our Mishnah actually makes sense with this as well. The Ketani, for it says Yitzia Shabbos Shtaim Shein Arba B'Fnim Shtaim Shein Arba B'Chutz V'Kom Mefarash Achnasa. Actually, if you go back to Masechah Shabbos, you'll find when it calls all those cases Yitzias, all those 8 cases Yitzias, and the first case that it actually gives is a case of bringing something inside. So therefore, we see that the term Yitzia and Achnasa, going out and going in, are interchangeable. Shema Mina. Rava Amarava said, Rishuyas Katani, Rishuyas Shabbos, Shtayim, Shehinab. In other words, Rava just changed the whole thing. He says he didn't necessarily mean taking it out, just means there are different domains for Shabbos. Again, exactly, it's not specifically so relevant to our Gemara, but he just settles it by saying it's considered Rishuyas. Okay, let's move on to Maris Nagayim. Maris Nagayim, Shnayim, Shehinab. Our Mishnah said that there are Maris Nagayim, there are 2, which are 4. What does that mean? It's not awesome. We learned elsewhere Maseches Nagayim. Maris Nagayim Shnayim Shenarba. You have 2 different words in the Torah which describe the way a nega looks. We just learned this in this past week's parsha, Parsha Tazria Mitzora. We just learned it. And the pasuk says, Adam kiyeh ba'ar b'saro se'es o sapachas o beharas. The person will have on his skin a se'es, or a sapachas, or a beharas. What are those things? So we'll define them soon. But se'es and beharas are the 2 different colors of this possible nega. Sapachas means there's a subcategory. So you have se'es, beharas are the main categories. Sapachas tells you there's a subcategory. So let's see what that is. Beharas is aza kashelik. It is the whitest of the white. It's white like snow. Shniel law. What's the subcategory of that one? Kisida heichal. It's like the lime, the plaster they used inside the heichal in the sanctuary. Se'es, katzemer. What's se'es? It's like katzemer lavan. It's like fresh white wool of an animal. Shni'alah, What's the subcategory of that? Kukrum beitza, like the membrane of an egg. Now, this is not the egg shell. What this is, when you break an egg, you'll notice inside the eggshell there's a little membrane. You could try this at home when you make an egg for breakfast this morning. If you take that membrane out and leave it to dry, you'll see it dries in a very white color. So that's what that's talking about. But that is the lowest category of white. In other words, the brightest white is snow. The non-brightest white, I'm not sure how to say that, but the least brightest white is going to be the krum beitza, the membrane of the egg. Now, anything which is less white than the membrane of the egg is called bohak, as the pasuk describes it. Bohak is not white enough, and it is tahar. So you have these 4 categories. Now, just to explain it very quickly, what we're saying over here is you have snow. The order of whiteness is snow, wool, lime, egg. So snow, wool, lime, egg. Now it's listed in our Gemara differently because you have snow, and then the subcategory of that is lime, and then you have the next category, which is wool, and the subcategory of that is going to be the egg. Because again, the 2 in the Torah are going to be the 2 brightest. And then each category is going to be underneath it. So essentially you have snow, wool, lime, egg, but it's listed as snow, and the subcategory of that is lime. And then you have wool, and the subcategory of that is going to be the egg. It's very important for the Gemara to remember that order. Amar Rav Chanina says, Man Tana Maros Nagayim. Who is the Tana of this Maros Nagayim? It can't be Rabbi Kiva, it can't be Rabbi Kiva. Why do Rabbi Kiva? If it would be Rabbi Kiva, Kivan the Amar Zulam Alamizu, Zulam Alamizu, came to heart to Sid Heichel Militzarif. He says that whenever the colors go exactly as I told you, in other words, the order of the brightness is going to be snow, wool, lime, egg, and that's how it goes. What's going to happen is you're going to have a problem combining the colors. Why? The halacha is you have to have a gris worth, a barley-sized piece for it to be tameh. If it's not going to be the size of this gris, of this barley, it's not going to be tameh. Now, what happens if you have a half barley which looks like sid heichel, like the lime of the heichel, and a half looks like another color? So technically, it should be able to be combined. However, there's a problem. We're going to explain right now why it's not going to work. Why? Because behadi man litzarfe. Which one can you combine the sid heichel with? Litzarfe behadi beharas. Do you want to combine it with beharas? The problem is ika se'es ta'adifa. As we explained, beharas is the snow. Se'es is the wool. And the subcategory of lime comes third. Now, if you're going to have one spot which is partially snow and partially lime, you can't combine those two because you're skipping a color. You're skipping the color of wool in between. You can't do that. Now, according to Rabbi Kiva, you have to go in color order. So you have this se'es, which is the wool, which is better than it. So you can't combine it. So then what do you want to do? You want to combine it with the color of the wool? You can't do that because Lav told the Didehu. As we just got finished explaining, it's not the subcategory of it. You can only combine a subcategory with the main category. But in this main category, it's not going to be connected. Because again, the main category of sid, of lime, is the snow. So technically, lime and snow are the only two that can be combined, but the problem is there's a brighter color in between that tells you can't combine it. So therefore, you're stuck. The Gemara says if that's the case, you have the same problem with the lowest category, which is krum beitza. When it comes to the egg membrane, what will you combine that with? You want to go ahead and combine it to se'es. The problem is you have ikasid. Se'es is the wool color, but then you have the sid, which is higher than the egg membrane. So you're skipping one in the middle. Let's start with sid. You want to go ahead and combine it with sid. The problem is it's not within the same category because it's a subcategory of the other one of the avos. So we go to the top of Vav Amod Aleph. So Haimai, Gemara says that's not a problem. What's going on here? Bishlam and below Sid, if you wouldn't have Sid in there, so then you'd below Sid Heichel, Krum Beitz Lokash, you would not have a problem of the egg membrane. Why the Afagav, the Krum Beitz mitatai, even though the egg membrane is the least bright white, it's mitatai, this ace, still you could say Rachmana Amar l'seis l'sapachas, and sapachas is tefel l'seis. Afagav the menat kamine tuva. In other words, if you only had those three, if you only had the snow, the wool, and the krum beitza, you could say, listen, the pasuk said there's something called a sapachas, which means that there's a lower category. You'd add it in, afagav the menat kamine tuva. El sidheichel kasha, but sidheichel is going to be a problem because that always gives you an issue with combining it, and therefore el machvarta, therefore erase it or white it out. Masnis lo Rabbi Akiva, can't be that our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. We will stop here. Have a wonderful day. Have a great day, Chavra.